Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the 6th webinar in Reflex Marine's webinar series. My name is Charlie House, and I'm the Client Relationship Manager at Reflex Marine. And I'm going to be moderating today's session. So first off, I've got some housekeeping rules to quickly run through. Today's webinar is scheduled to last for around 1 hour, including the question and answer session at the end. All attendees are automatically muted to allow the speakers to present without interruption. Questions can be submitted via the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can ask a question anytime during the webinar. The presentation recording will be emailed to you approximately 48 hours after the session. All of our webinars are also available via on-demand via our YouTube channel, which is just YouTube/Reflex Marine. Okay then, I think we're ready to get started. The topic of today's webinar session is decommissioning and personnel transfer. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day, Mrs. Sandra Antonovic, Reflex Marine's Chief Operating Officer. Sandra is responsible for global commercial development and strategic business positioning at Reflex Marine. She is leading the opening of new markets, and she has operational expertise focusing on business transition, diversification, and strategic growth. Today, Sandra will provide us an overview of the decommissioning industry and how personnel access technology can support the ever-changing demands of the decommissioning sector. According to last year's Oil and Gas UK's Decommissioning Insight report, spending on decommissioning is set to rise steadily over the next few years. Between 2024 and 2026, annual investments in the sector should reach around £1.5 billion, with the total for the decade projected to be £15.1 billion. Despite all of the setbacks of the oil price and the coronavirus, it's still been a busy year globally, with many operators successfully removing topside pipelines and substructures around the world, with the UK, USA, Norway, and Brazil leading the way. More and more countries and operators are exploring the most efficient and cost-effective ways to carry out decommissioning projects, successfully and responsibly. Today, Sandra is going to run you through Reflex Marine's experience in supporting decommissioning operations. Sandra, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Charlie. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to, I can see some of our existing clients and some new people. And also thank you to our partners who joined us for this session today. As Charlie said, I'll run through our perspective of decommissioning industry, and then I will run you through some of the off-the-shelf products that we offer that can be extremely useful during decommissioning process offshore for various levels for reducing cost and controlling cost of the decommissioning process, particularly when it comes to transfer of personnel and light cargo, and then also for mitigating hazard and being extremely useful to provide flexibility in extending the operating envelope when you're doing the offshore decommissioning. So before we get started, I'll just quickly run through the decommissioning workflow as we understand it, so that everybody's on the same page about what I'm talking about. So when we have production offshore, at a certain point, that platform or oil field will come to a late life, and then the end of life phase will begin. The end of life will determine when the cease of production will happen, and then we are getting into warm suspension or warm stack process, then cold suspension or cold stacking, removal, whether it's partial or full, and then once the full removal has been completed, we are moving towards dismantling and disposal, and the end is surveillance. So those are the main phases as we see them. Today, I'm going to focus on one particular phase, and that is going to be removal. The products that I'm going to talk about will be useful, and we have had experience using them during the removal process. So to summarize, decommissioning is a global industry, or a part of the oil and gas industry. While today I'm going to talk about it from the oil and gas perspective, of course, anything can be decommissioned. You can decommission an FSRU, an LNG tanker, offshore wind farm, anything really that is operating offshore can be decommissioned. In that sense, while decommissioning can be a not so happy topic for the operators, because something is coming to the end of life, hence the financial reward is also coming to an end. Looking it from a supply chain perspective, even if you are one of the main subcontractors, it is a very lucrative business. And in that sense, we shouldn't run away from it. We should try to embrace it, and in the entire supply chain should try and find a way how to be a part of the decommissioning industry. Going back to the oil and gas part of it, there are over 7,000 platforms worldwide in over 50 countries. So this is not a European thing. This is not a North Sea thing. It's a very much global thing that is happening. Decommissioning costs, or if we want to look at it from a more positive side, decommissioning turnover, if we look at it as an industry, is roughly estimated between $100 and $200 billion. And there are different estimates floating around. Now, some people may say, okay, this is a rather wide range of turnover between 100 and 200 billion. That is because different regions classify decommissioning and have the requirements for decommissioning in a very different way. And then also the decommissioning cost can vary quite a lot. It can go anywhere from, I don't know, $10 million to $4 billion if you are decommissioning the entire oil field. So it's quite an expensive process, and controlling the cost is quite an important piece of the puzzle. I will talk about that a little bit later. So decommissioning, while it has been going on over the past years, it is going on as we speak. It will be going on certainly for the next 40 or 50 years. So this is an industry that hasn't peaked yet, and it's not going to peak for quite some time. And again, I'm only talking about oil and gas aspect of it, so without looking at LNG or offshore wind. There are many variables in decommissioning, and they make it slightly challenging for the planning process. And I will run through them in the slides that are coming. So the first question, and the obvious question, is the question of safety. Of course, question of safety comes up regardless of in which phase of your offshore operations are you. Are you in seismic or in exploration or production? There is always this question of safety. But it is more important it is becoming, it has the additional layer, I would say, when we think about decommissioning and when we are planning decommissioning process, because you are going through an unusual process. So it is not business as usual. Things are not working as they work in the production phase. You are starting to dismantle everything. So the chances of a major accident hazard are increasing. And you have to take that into the account when you are planning the decommissioning process. So the question of safety is quite an important one here. The industry collaboration in decommissioning industry is quite good, I would say. particularly in European countries, but in other parts of the world as well. Some countries even have the requirement for contractors who have been dealing with decommissioning or have been leading in decommissioning processes to share the information and to share the learnings that they have so that others can learn from their experience. Because it is extremely complex process and extremely dangerous process in many ways. So of course, everyone's goal is to minimize risk as much as possible. Sharing knowledge and transferring knowledge is one of the best ways how to minimize that, how to minimize risk. The legislative requirements are very different in different countries. While certain things may be very similar, before you enter planning a decommissioning process, you should make yourself fully aware of the requirements for safety and for any other aspects of decommissioning. And they would often be different for the type of work that you are doing offshore and the type of work that you are doing onshore. So moving forward, we come to a question of cost. What is interesting about decommissioning and what operators find quite challenging and very time-consuming during planning process is the question of cost. So when you are commissioning something, you expect that something, whether it's a platform or a vessel or an oil field or a gas field, to produce and to give you some kind of return over a certain period of time. With decommissioning, you are in the end of life phase. So it's the end. There is not going to be a reward after that, right? So you will have the cost, and you won't have any revenue after decommissioning is completed. In that sense, every company that is entering decommissioning is focusing a lot of time and a lot of energy on planning, because planning is the best way to avoid unexpected costs, unexpected hurdles along the way. Usually there are delays in the start date of decommissioning because planning takes longer than expected. And that's all right. It is better to have a delay with a start date rather than to enter into decommissioning process without having it properly planned. So what are the main cost questions that we need to address? Legal requirements in a particular country or a region, the environmental requirements in that same country, other types of constraints, weather, what kind of weather are we talking about? Sea conditions, wind, visibility. Is it an area where fog is quite common, so the visibility will be low most of the time, for example? And then we get to contingency. So how are we planning for contingency? What is our plan B? What is our plan C? And how are we managing the risks? So how are we determining the likelihood of a risk and the consequence of risk? And then what are our options to mitigate that? I thought this would be an interesting slide to show because it summarizes offshore decommissioning in different clusters by different categories. So we can look at it by depth, by structure, by removal, by region, and by service type. Charlie will share the presentation with all of you afterwards, so I'm not going to go in detail, and it's pretty self-explanatory anyway. But what I would like to talk about is regional scope. So these are the main regions that have decommissioning activities going on at the moment, or that have decommissioning projects either in the beginning phase, or we know that there will be decommissioning projects. So let's start with Europe. UK and Norway, so the North Sea is the obvious place where quite a lot of decommissioning is already taking place. And the number of platforms that are to be decommissioned is increasing. So that's UK and Norway. We also have the Netherlands, and then we have some decommissioning opportunities and projects in Italy and in Denmark. Going to the west, we have North America, US, Canada, and Mexico. So Gulf of Mexico is the obvious place there, and then the Atlantic coast of Canada. There are other places, of course, but these two would be most important ones. Moving to the east, we have Asia Pacific with Indonesia, Malaysia, China, Australia, and the rest of Asia Pacific. And then we have Middle East and Africa with United Arab Emirates, Angola, Saudi, Nigeria, Egypt, Iran, and Tunisia. And of course, in the South America, we have Brazil that already has some decommissioning projects, and we have potential in Argentina, Colombia, and Trinidad. So what is actually driving those markets? It's important to understand what is driving those markets so that you can assess your potential there, right? So if you are in part of the supply chain, or if you are a heavy lift vessel company and you would like to engage in decommissioning projects globally, one of the main things that you need to understand is what is driving each particular market. And it's not always the same thing. While the mature oil fields and old structures and platforms that are not deemed safe anymore and should be decommissioned for that reason are the main driver everywhere. In some countries, other drivers can be different. For example, in UK, tax refunds are one of the main drivers of what is going to be decommissioned when. Because companies who are decommissioning their platforms do get a tax refund in the UK. In Norway, for example, the decision from the government and from the state to move away from heavy hydrocarbons is driving the decision making to move ahead with some decommissioning projects sooner rather than later. And in USA, for example, the regulatory infrastructure for aging offshore installations is focused on cutting losses from economically unviable fields. So while all of these countries have similar starting points, other factors that are driving decommissioning decisions are quite different. In Canada, they have managed to come up with economical and with easy removal of the topside structure. And that flexibility and that simplifying the process made it easier for companies to go ahead with decisions to decommission their platforms or entire oil fields. In Mexico, so going down to the Gulf of Mexico, the complete removal of the aging infrastructure is currently dominating their market. Looking at the Asia Pacific, in China, the shallow water segment is currently driving their market because most of the aging infrastructure and aging oil fields is in the shallow water. With Indonesia, they had a declining oil production over the past 10 years, and they have quite a lot of aging oil fields. So they will drive the market over there. In United Arab Emirates and Australia, there is increased number of mature oil fields. In United Arab Emirates, they're in shallow water, so that simplifies some of the process a little bit. In Angola, we are looking similar to Gulf of Mexico. On the Mexican side, we are looking at complete removal of the aging infrastructure. And then looking at Saudi, they haven't really tapped into decommissioning analysis fully, but we can see the increasing decommissioning of parts of the Safania offshore field. So they are moving towards that. So it will be interesting to continue watching what are they going to do moving forward. And then in Brazil, we have the aging oil fields and aging structures. Some of them have to be removed due to safety. So safety, again, it is constantly a theme that is going through almost every slide and every conversation that we have about offshore decommissioning. This map is summarizing what I've just explained from a different angle. So it shows the number of offshore rigs across regions that I've just covered. The bigger the circle, the higher the number of offshore rigs that will at some point have to be decommissioned. So you can see North Sea, quite a big circle there, Gulf of Mexico, Middle East with United Arab Emirates, and then China and Southeast Asia with Indonesia and Malaysia, West Africa, and then other regions slightly smaller, but still an important piece of the market. And finally, wrapping up this part of the presentation, I thought this would be quite an interesting map to show. So this is Gulf of Mexico. The US side, we have Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and the color of the sea suggests the depth. So the lighter the color, the more shallow the water. You can see here the enormous number of offshore rigs, platforms being there. And it gives you an idea of the scale of the operation. So the gray triangles are the ones that have been removed already, and the red ones are the ones that are still in service. So try to imagine if we would scale this to the North Sea, how North Sea would look like, or offshore Norway, offshore Brazil, Indonesia, China. So this is an enormous potential for the supply chain, looking at the decommissioning industry. A lot of people are considering decommissioning industry as extremely quick and dirty process, not very sophisticated. But I would say only a person who doesn't really understand the decommissioning world, who doesn't really understand the end-of-life phase, would be able to say that. And well, this image showing the dismantling and cutting of the last parts of the platform onshore, so this is happening onshore, does look pretty horrific and not very sophisticated and extremely dirty. This is just one small portion, and it obviously presents an image outside of controlled environment that we would see in Europe or in Canada. Moving to this photograph, we can understand that decommissioning is indeed a very sophisticated process. And it can look extremely attractive, like on this image. So here we have Pioneering Spirit, the biggest world's heavy lift construction vessel. And they have one of our products on board. So I thought it would be interesting to show you this image. So Pioneering Spirit, I'm sure all of you are aware, but just to summarize it for everyone's benefit, was designed for a single lift installation and removal. So it can remove the top side of some platforms in one single lift. It's, of course, expensive, and the cost has to be re-examined whether this is the best way forward, but it does provide extremely sophisticated way of decommissioning an oil platform. It was undertaking decommissioning projects such as removal of Noreco's Tyra East and Tyra West topsides and Shell's Brent Delta platform. They have on board one of our Frog XT6 personnel transfer carriers, and they use it as contingency when they need it. So moving forward, I would like now to discuss our products and to share with you some information about our products and to explain how they can help you do several things: control your cost during decommissioning process, minimize the risk of major hazard, mitigate potential risks that you would have during decommissioning process happening offshore, and ensure safety of your crew. The first one that I would like to present is Wave 4. You have seen the video at the beginning of the webinar before the presentation started. If you joined early, we were showing the promotional video. Charlie will also share with you a Wave 4 user manual in the chat hands-out section, and he will share the playlist, our YouTube channel playlist of Wave 4 videos, which are quite useful because they have user briefing, and you can also see the testing process for Wave 4. So on your right-hand side, you have the unit itself. On your left-hand side, you have the main operating parameters, so the main spec of the unit. It has been used in decommissioning by companies like Boskalis. They used it during decommissioning of ConocoPhillips platforms in the North Sea. And it is used today by Seaway 7, so former Seaway Heavy Lifting, and by some other companies. So I'm just mentioning two for your information so that you can get a picture what kind of company would use that carrier. The interesting thing about Wave 4 is that it converts easily to a medevac option. So you would slide the stretcher above the red luggage area in the middle of in the center of the unit, and that would convert it to a medevac option. Going back to the safety and the increased chances of major accident hazard during decommissioning phase, this is an extremely important feature that is offered that can help you mitigate quite a few risks that you would have during planning of removal part of the decommissioning. Wave is extremely versatile in how you can use it. It has very small area requirements for landing. It has the smallest footprint in the world of all standing personal transfer carriers, so where people are standing. And then in terms of weight, it is fairly lightweight, all things considered. And then it has quite a robust operating envelope looking at the decommissioning requirements. We had a separate webinar just on Wave 4. So if you would like to learn more about this particular product, if you haven't used it in the past, we have a Wave 4 webinar on our YouTube channel. You can watch it for free. It's 1 hour, and it gives you in-depth presentation of Wave 4. If you are decommissioning or are planning to decommission a platform or any other structure in very challenging weather conditions, say offshore Canada or offshore Russia, or in the northern parts of the North Sea or in Norwegian Sea, or perhaps in Caspian, you would be looking at something that offers additional protection to your crew. So that would be Frog XT4 for 4 passengers, or Frog XT6 for 6 passengers. They have exactly same footprint, so the only thing that is different between those 2 units is the space between seats and how many passengers they can take. So we have a 4-person and a 6-person option. The operating envelope would be the same for 4-passenger and for 6-passenger unit. So we would be looking at up to 4 meters of significant wave height, up to 40 knots of wind, and then extreme temperature range. It can operate equally well in Arctic and in tropical conditions. Again, it converts to medevac very easily in a matter of minutes, and in that sense, it offers extreme protection and flexibility and the ability for you to mitigate risks of major accident hazards that are being planned for during planning phase of decommissioning offshore. I have mentioned Boskalis and Seaway 7. So both of them have used Wave. Boskalis was doing it through a rental. So they did not purchase the unit because they had a very precise timing of their decommissioning requirement. And they were renting the unit for that time only. And then they would return it to us and move on with the next phase where they didn't actually need the contingency unit. Seaway 7 owns several units, so they own a fleet of units because they're using them almost daily and continuously. So it is really the question of you trying to understand your requirements over the next period of time, next couple of years. For companies that are looking at things from project to project, renting certainly makes more sense. And for companies where that's one of their main core businesses, then owning a unit might be more cost effective. In both cases, we offer full service support, replacement parts, operational support, technical support 24/7. So whatever you may need, you would get in touch with us and we would organize it for you, or we would provide you feedback or answers if you are unsure how to proceed in a particular scenario, what to do, whether you can do certain things, whether it is safe to proceed or anything similar. We have an extensive partner network across the globe. So servicing of units is a fairly simple process if it's managed by us, and it can be done onshore and offshore depending on your preference or requirements. For Seaway 7, for example, we have done both. We have been servicing their units onshore, and we have done this offshore as well in different scenarios. Frog XT2, I'm showing this one because you have seen the video before the presentation started. So some of you might have some questions about this unit particularly. We did have a webinar, separate webinar on XT2 as well. So if you would like to learn more about this unit, please do go to our YouTube channel, and there is Frog XT2 webinar presentation, which focuses just on XT2. It was primarily designed for LNG and offshore wind industry. So it is not specifically a decommissioning type of product. The reason I'm showing it here is because sometimes the support vessel of the heavy lift vessel involved in decommissioning, or any other part of the decommissioning process may have a very limited landing area or may have a very limited deck space. So then you could use Frog XT2. The downside of this unit and why it would be better to opt for a Wave 4 unit is that it doesn't convert to a medevac. So it is extremely versatile and flexible when you need to transfer people, but it wouldn't convert to a medevac mode. So if you have a person that you need to get to safety and that person is able to walk and to sit on their own, then yes, you would be able to transfer them in this unit. But if you have a requirement to move someone in the stretcher, then this is not really the best option, is it? Another thing that I think is important to mention here is the cost. So what kind of cost are we talking about when we talk about these units? In terms of purchase, we are looking at tens of thousands of euros or dollars, depending on in which currency you are working. So, for example, XT4 would be between $35,000 and $40,000, and the Wave would be around $20,000. That is for purchase. So, if your core business is, or one of your core businesses is decommissioning, you can understand the long-term benefit and the small type of an investment to provide you with the long-time benefit in mitigating major accident hazards, in providing safety to your crew, and in having flexibility in different operating scenarios. When I say having flexibility in different operating scenarios, what do I actually mean under that? We have areas, I've already mentioned Canada, where fog is quite common on the Atlantic part, which can make decommissioning process or any process really happening offshore quite challenging. Using a frog gives you the opportunity to extend your operating envelope beyond what would be normally expected as an operating envelope from a gangway or a helicopter. So what I'm saying here is that you shouldn't convert from a gangway to a frog and stop using gangways, or convert from a helicopter to a frog, but rather have the frog as an additional option that can help you mitigate a lot of risks, but also can help you extend your operating envelope and maximize the time that you have offshore. We have companies in West Africa, from ENI, Shell, Total, BP, who are using some other methods of transferring people, but they're combining them with frogs, with Frog XT, because it extends the operating envelope, and they're able to move people during low visibility times, during night if they need to, during the emergency situations if there is lots of smoke or a fire. And then we also have areas like Caspian or North Sea, where using a frog again helps you extend the operating envelope when the sea conditions are harsher or when the wind is quite high. In Canada, most operators would use Frog XT to extend their operating envelope during times when there is a lot of fog. Moving forward with the off-the-shelf products that can be extremely helpful during decommissioning process, we have Stormwork, our work basket. If you are not familiar with that, we will have a separate webinar just on Stormwork in 2 weeks. So not next week, but the week after, if you're interested to join us for that one. For now, I'm just going to give you the main specs of the unit. You can see the image on your right-hand side. It floats, self-rights. It has anti-snagging features, and it offers most of the protection that a Frog XT or a Wave would offer in terms when we are looking at the risks of working offshore. This, of course, is designed for work on height offshore rather than to transfer people. So we would suggest to use Wave for transferring personnel and to use Stonework when you actually have to do work offshore. Going back to those companies that I mentioned earlier, Seaway 7 again has a fleet of Stonework units, and they're using them daily. They have purchased them and they're using them daily for their operations. Also, ConocoPhillips Offshore Australia has a fleet of Stonework units, and they're using them for work offshore. StormPro Mini is not an off-the-shelf product. So this product is has been tested. We have a testing video on our YouTube channel that you can see, but it is not off-the-shelf product because it can be modified to fit the exact specifications of a client. We are currently developing those customized models for clients like Vattenfall and Damen. So if you have they're very suitable for moving around tools and heavier equipment that wouldn't fit in the personal transfer basket. And as you can see on this image, they can easily convert to a workbench that can be useful during decommissioning process if the removal isn't being done by one single lift. So in that sense, it is an interesting product that I wanted to run through, but I'm stressing again that it is not an off-the-shelf product. And now just a few images to help you visualize how these products look when they're in action. So we have Wave 4 here on Saipem 7000. Here as well on Saipem 7000, and then we have here, this is not a decommissioning phase, of course, it is Fugro Wave Walker offshore England, but I thought it would be interesting for you to see the size of it when it's on the deck. So how much space does it take when it's on the deck? Here it is being used during low visibility time. Here we have Frog XT4 again on the deck of a vessel so that you can understand the size and how it scales. Again, Frog XT10. Here we have Frog XT6 being used by DEME. This is an offshore wind farm project, not a decommissioning project, but again, I thought it would be useful for you to see how it scales and how it fits on the deck where there are quite a lot of things going on. Here we have XT6 on a heavy lift. So this is a scenario that is quite on topic here. So you can see that there is quite a lot of space here for landing, quite a lot of space here for storing. So the space isn't really an issue on a heavy lift vessel. We also have, I should mention, we also have Frog XT10 for 10 passengers. I didn't present it here today because I'm not sure it would really tick the boxes for decommissioning and that there would be a need to transfer 10 people during decommissioning phase. But the important thing to mention about Frog XT10 is that it can hold 2 stretchers. So going back to safety, risk management, planning, major accident hazards, mitigating those risks, renting a Frog XT10 to have on standby during decommissioning projects on with a heavy lift vessel might be a good idea because it gives you option to transfer 2 passengers in a stretcher at the same time. We also had a presentation, a webinar on XT10. It's available on our YouTube channel, and you can watch it for free if you are more interested in that particular product. Finally, wrapping up slowly the webinar and the presentation, the last thing that I would like to discuss today and to share with you is Deck Motion Monitor. So it again, it can help you improve safety, improve the operating envelope, extend the operating envelope, lower your costs by reducing waiting on weather. So I did mention some of the regions where the weather conditions can be quite extreme. The sea states can be quite extreme. The wind speed can be quite extreme, and it is not always easy to understand and to have a very clear picture when can lift go ahead and when it shouldn't go ahead. What Deck Motion Monitor does is it connects two modules. One is on a vessel and one is on a crane. They talk to each other through a wireless network, and you have a display like a tablet, which shows you in a very simple traffic light system. You can see it here on the left-hand side, the grid of a deck of a vessel in a traffic light system, showing you when it is okay to do the lift and when you should proceed with caution and when it's quite dangerous and you should hold the operation. So green, amber, and red. Again, Boskalis was using this system, Deck Motion Monitoring, during decommissioning of ConocoPhillips platforms in the North Sea. They rented it for a specific period of time, and they used it, and they were happy with it. Relative deck motion monitoring can reduce waiting on weather. Charlie will share with you a link to a video which explains it in detail. So you can watch it after the presentation. I didn't put it here today because I'm trying to be mindful of the time. In the video, the person who is speaking mentions that it can reduce waiting on weather to up to 50%. While that is true, it would be the higher end. I would say on average, if you're looking at the average reduction on waiting on weather, that would be around 30%. So you can improve your operating envelope basically by 30% if you use deck motion monitoring. The good thing is that it also has a camera option, so you can have double confirmation, so to speak. You can see the traffic light system on a tablet, and you can also actually have the visibility of the deck. So this can be transmitted to a person who is sitting onshore, to a crane operator, to a vessel master, to anybody really who is a part of the decision-making process, whether the lift should go ahead or not. And that brings us to the end of the webinar and the presentation. Just a few more things before I close. So I have mentioned that we have an extensive network of partners. We can support you anywhere in the world, both with replacement parts and with servicing. We have extensive materials and videos that are very useful for any type of operation, including decommissioning, on our YouTube channel. And then we have lots of materials that you can download for free on our website, reflexmarine.com. If you go to support tab, there is a download section. We have lots of materials there that you can just download for free. Also, our operations and engineering team would be happy to answer any operational questions that you might have, figuring out how to perform any type of operation with a specific type of vessel, or in a specific weather conditions, or in a specific operational scenarios. I will share contact details in a second. I already mentioned, but just to repeat one more time, so the week after next, I will be talking about stonework in particular, not just focusing on decommissioning, but covering this off-the-shelf product in total, and sharing with you how other companies are using it in different scenarios. And finally, our contact details. The best email and an easy one to remember, our website. And then if you want to connect with us on social media, I would say the most important one is our YouTube channel. It has very, very useful videos over there. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope this was useful. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer. Before I give it to Charlie and he can tell me if we have any questions. We did have one question during the registration process. So one gentleman sent a question: what is your safety concern about offshore projects? While this is quite a wide question, and I could spend another hour talking about that, looking only at decommissioning process. So if we only focus on decommissioning, that was the topic of today's webinar, I would say that apart from the things that I've already mentioned, so extreme chances of hazard and the need to manage risk in a very serious way, we have to look at the human factor as well, because you will have workers, offshore crew will have to follow certain rules and regulations for decommissioning process offshore. But then you will have a part of your team will be working onshore with dismantling and removal of the topside. They will have to follow rules that apply for onshore work. Sometimes those rules are not aligned. So the communication process has to be managed quite carefully so that everybody's on the same page and that both teams understand why the other team is requiring certain things to happen, because not having that understanding can cause quite serious safety risks. The other thing, again, looking at the human factor, is some of the people or a lot of the people that are going to be involved in the decommissioning process and the removal offshore would be workers who have been working on that very platform. Seeing it being dismantled and being in the end of life process can be very discouraging for them. And they can lose the motivation, they can lose focus, and they are more prone to human error. So you have to take that into the account during planning phase and ensure that you have mitigated that particular risk. Charlie, if we have any other questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sandra. We do have one more question. And it is the storm work accepted for personnel transfer?
Well, the storm work hasn't been designed for personnel transfer. While in theory, yes, you can transfer people using storm work, you would be exposing them to some risk because that is not what the unit was designed to do. And the risk that you would be exposing them to is, I will go back to, bear with me as I find this image of stonework, which might be easier as I'm explaining. So the yellow buoyancy that we see on each corner, it has dual role. One is to allow the unit to float if for whatever reason it ends in the water. The other one is to protect the passenger from lateral impact. So looking at the transfer unit, you can see that the yellow buoyancy is quite extensive, and it offers very big protection if the unit is accidentally slammed against the container or against any other hard surface during lift or during transfer or during landing, which is particularly important during decommissioning process because there will be hard surfaces all over the place. But going back to storm work, so while it will offer you some kind of protection, people inside are not strapped in any way. So they're not seated, they're not standing and having some kind of protection that holds them in one single place. So there is a risk of falling within the unit and hitting their head against a hard surface of the unit. I see that as a risk if you are using it to transfer people. Of course, you can say they can just hold the rail and they will be fine. And I suppose in benign weather conditions, that would be true. But if you are using it in harsh weather conditions or in a very unpredictable scenario, then I would really opt for having both units on deck and renting, for example, both of them, because in terms of cost, you are talking really about petty cash if you are renting them compared to entire cost of the decommissioning process. Because it will offer you more flexibility and you won't have to worry, what if somebody slams their head? What if somebody gets injured? What if something happens? So yes, I mean, in theory, you can use it to transfer people, but that's not what it has been designed for. I hope this answers the question. Did we have anything else, Charlie? Any other questions?
That's great. Thanks, Sandra. No, I don't think we had any more for today. But if any do come up, please feel free to email us at info@reflexmarine.com. And I think we'll end it there then on that note. Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.